Well, welcome to the Saturation Podcast, where we have discussions with church leaders about the life of faith and the mission of the church. This is our maiden voyage. This is our first ever episode. I'm Levi Pancake. I'm a local church pastor in Syracuse, New York, alongside Dr. Dwight Smith. If you'd like more information about some of the things that we're discussing in this episode or other episodes, I'm going to give you two websites you can go to. One is scpglobal.org, or you can go to Dwight's website, dwightpaulsmith.com. All right, so with this episode, I want us to talk about why we have a podcast, why the name Saturation, what is Saturation Church Planting, things like that. But before we do anything, I want to introduce you, and I need to make a preliminary statement, a precursor, if you will. And that is that the views and opinions expressed by Dr. Dwight Paul Smith are his and his alone. In no way do they reflect my opinions, my local church's opinions, our sponsors' opinions. We don't have any sponsors right now. But Dwight is almost 76, and you can say things as a mature, seasoned church leader, missionary, all of that I can't say at 39. And so Dwight is a personal mentor of mine. He's mentored a number of my friends, colleagues, and has had a huge influence with our local church and stuff we're doing around the world. But Dwight, tell us a little bit about you, who you are. Give us the Cliff Notes version, the 3 minutes of a little bit of your experience, and then we'll get into why we started this podcast.
I'm married. I've been married almost 56 years this year. I have 4 kids, 12 grandkids, and have been a local church pastor, president of a mission agency, founder of a network of churches and agencies working in the former Russian Empire when it collapsed, and getting at what it might mean to have that access to a population of people who were somewhat locked off for many years. And then the founder of Saturation Church Planting International 30 years ago or so, and have had the privilege of 70 plus countries of the world, working with leaders, helping them think through the big questions. The two biggest questions are, what does God want for your country? What does the Bible say about that?
Right.
And second, what would it look like if God did what he wanted to do in your nation? Mm-hmm. Trying to get at the concept that access to the gospel is what God's all about. And we're going to get into that. So that's sort of the short one. And don't you need more?
And what are you doing these days?
I'm writing. I do my own blog, so I do quite a bit of writing. Several books. There's 7 or 8 books that are available on the website that will lead you to Amazon, but they're there. And we're trying to get some of them into other languages. I think the Renovation book, which is one of the key books, is available in, 12, 15 languages. So what we'd like to do is be able to influence as many people in the world to think as God thinks about the church and time and eternity and salvation and the people who have come to faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we've named this podcast Saturation Podcast.
Yeah.
And the name of the organization that you founded, still are the president of, Saturation Church Planting.
Right.
Tell us a bit about saturation, why that word. I know it's related to evangelization, but define some of those terms and what you mean by that outcome.
Well, the more I've thought about it, the word Saturation Church Planting is kind of a little bit of a misnomer unless you understand what we're actually saying. I was a child, conceptually, of a guy by the name of Jim Montgomery, who had developed a concept called DAWN, Discipling a Whole Nation. And the idea was, how do you get a church in access to every man, woman, and child? And the point being, not simply to put a church there, which is why sometimes we can be misunderstood, Saturation Church Planting.
Sure. A lot of church planting networks.
Let's just plant churches.
Yeah, which is a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing. But it can also be a cul-de-sac rather than really what we wanted. And so the concept is that what we want to do is get the gospel in access to every man, woman, and child. And the idea of multiple churches all over, or one in access, Jim would have said one in every 1,000 or 1,500 people. From experience, especially in the Philippines and Guatemala and El Salvador and some places in Africa, one in access to every man, woman, child, one in every 1,500 people, so that in my terms, the gospel becomes walkable through people. Mm-hmm. So saturation church planting has been an effort to ask the question, what are the principles about church leadership and strategy that if they're not there and they are biblical, make it difficult to reproduce church and equally reproduce the kinds of churches that actually you need. It does no good to have a church on a corner if it's not making an impact in the circle where it lives. Mm-hmm. So saturation church planting evolved from that kind of thinking.
Mm-hmm. And why did you feel the need that you needed to start that organization in particular? There's plenty of missions agencies. There's a lot of churches, a lot of denominations, a lot of networks.
Loads of them.
But this seems to have, maybe not alone, but a unique emphasis with a particular outcome, working with church leaders.
Yeah.
But what compelled you to start this and continue this work that can run parallel alongside many other networks, denominations, et cetera?
30 years ago, the board that I was working with in the agency where I was the president, many of them were close friends that I'd been a part of for a long time, just simply said, you need to be free from the organizational responsibilities of an agency to be able to go out and be a catalyst, a spokesman, a voice for concepts of reformation, things that are not heretical, but out of focus. So they felt compelled that I needed to do that. I agreed with them and began to work at that. We are not a mission agency. And a whole lot of reasons we're not a mission agency, but chief of which is we want to be in the very center of the apostolic nature of the church.
Now you need to define apostolic. It can have different meanings.
Well, the word apostle means sent. Mm-hmm. And the word apostolic, which is the book of Acts, is the sending of the church.
Yep.
And the sending
the mobilization of the people of God.
And the sending goes forth through leadership. Mm-hmm. So key people being sent by the church, by God, out into the world to represent what he wants done in those places. So we are really a collection of apostolically inclined kind of people. We're not apostles in that sense of the New Testament, but we are a sent people who try to work in these sending, prophetic, teaching, evangelistic kinds of ways that help the church become more relevant to its nature, not relevant to culture as much as relevant to its nature, so that the way God has built it to multiply becomes natural to it. Mm-hmm. And we're going to get into all that. Mm-hmm. So my board felt that I'd worked at that for 10 or 12 years, and being a child of Jim Montgomery and discipling a whole nation, and Jim had to articulate 12, 13, 14 principles that a nation could organize itself around. But the longer I looked at that, the more I realized that if you can't get the church to understand who it is, mm-hmm. how do you multiply it? And just planting a church doesn't necessarily mean that you reach the people in the place where it's planted.
Right. The kind of church, the type of church.
Yeah. So I've spent 50 years thinking about that nature of church, that nature of leadership that is most conducive with how God created it. It's not a strategy. It's not a method. It's a way of thinking.
Yeah,
that is biblical, that is natural to God and what he did. And so how do we cooperate with that to see it do everything that God, the Spirit, wants it to do in a place? Mm-hmm. And I say that clearly because I can't simply make it happen. God, the Spirit, has to. But we can posture the church and leadership to be in such a way that the genius of people, which is God's greatest design, mm-hmm. is most mobilized to go do what God wants to do in a place. Mm-hmm. A lot more to that.
Sure.
But those are some of the peaks.
Yeah. Why did you think we should have this podcast? Because we got a lot of resources out there. We're working in a lot of nations.
Loads of them.
We've got partners all over the place.
Yeah.
But this is one medium we haven't used. And just explain a little bit of the heart behind why we wanted to do this.
There are English speakers all over the world that we're connected to. And we want to be able to constantly encourage, challenge, and expand their number in ways that make more sense than getting on an airplane and traveling 12, 14 hours, spending thousands of dollars to be in a place where indigeneity, the indigenous population, doesn't really maybe need us to be there. But it would like for us to be collaborators, partners, friends, spokesmen. And so at my age, I have loads of children all over the world, spiritual children.
Yeah.
Spiritual
That's
children.
an important qualification.
Yeah,
Yes.
spiritual children. People who believe that I have been an articulator of something that was already in their heart. And so we want to be able to continue to speak to them. And so my hope is that it becomes another asset to be able to speak in shorter frames, the key concepts that they can pick up and share with other English speakers. We understand it's not in all the indigenous languages, but the English language is just about everywhere. So what can we do from a prophetic point of view, not opening the canon and speaking new things, but what can we do?
Prophetic meaning corrective. This is what the Bible says. This is what we're doing.
What can we do to help be corrective in all these places? That you're in a dead end because you're practicing church in a way that God didn't create the church to be. And so you're stymied. And so I'm just hoping that it becomes another encouraging tool, instructive tool, expanding tool that in all the countries where we're involved, and I think, we think we have beachhead, and I don't know what the number is.
Upward of 60.
60 nations of the
Yep.
earth. And I hope before I die, we're in every one of them as a beachhead. Because we do believe God needs that apostolic reminder and prophetic corrective. Wherever we are nationwide, pre-Christian, you have that apostolic sending evangelization need. Wherever you are post-Christian, which is a lot of the world today, you got to come back around and remind the church in its second, third, and fourth generation, whoa. You're not here just to occupy. Their fathers understood, and grandfathers and grandmothers understood they were not here to occupy. But that's what happens when church has been in a place a long time. Post-Christian means they begin to feel like occupy is what it's all about. And then nominalism sets in, and pastors become frustrated, leadership becomes frustrated, and all of a sudden, the engaging nature of the transformational reality of the gospel begins to lose traction.
Right.
Yeah.
I've heard you often say our emphasis is more of an apostolic outcome, a sent outcome, which you've already said, with a corrective message. This is often what church leadership is doing. This is often how churches are operated. And you've already said it, not sinful, not necessarily wrong. Some of it can be.
Some of it can be.
But
that's in their heart.
But often out of focus.
Yeah.
And so looking at the scriptures with church leaders around the world and seeing biblical convictions, emphasizing those, celebrating those, articulating those, and helping them to the degree that we can with indigenous leaders, help align their churches and their influence with those biblical principles.
Which God is made to reproduce.
Yeah.
And it reproduces to the degree that the Holy Spirit knows it can.
Right.
And so we can't press any further than that reality, but we can align ourselves to be ready.
Yeah.
And there's some things that are so obvious that, I mean, how many people disagree? I've been doing this for ages. And I don't know if I can remember in my mind. I don't hear in my ears.
Generally,
people
when
who
we
say,
articulate
no, I don't hear it.
Right.
Yeah.
They generally agree on the surface. They're hard to implement often, and they don't come without some pain points.
Yeah, of course they don't.
And our hope is with this podcast, we can refresh some of those concepts and convictions. We can point people to some other resources. And there is an audience that you mentioned of people that we are connected with all over the world that we hope are encouraged and strengthened and instructed. But there might be a newer group of people as well, church leaders, church members, who may be exposed to some of these things. And why should they listen to something like this, in your opinion?
Yeah.
Why? How can these type of conversations be helpful to them?
Because the daily work of local leadership easily gets out of focus. The demand of people, the need to organize Sunday, to figure out what you're going to preach, what's the music going to be? All of those organizational issues
Not to mention the interpersonal drama and issues and challenges.
Everything else,
and,
that you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
All those things can begin to overwhelm you, and you lose sight of the fact that that's not why we're here on earth. Now, those are our realities, and we have to struggle with them, and we have to find effectiveness in them. Yes, all of that.
And they still need to get done to some degree.
Of course they do.
Yeah.
But some of them don't need to get done.
That's fair.
But that's not why we're here on earth. We're here on earth for the gospel of Jesus Christ to be extended to every man, woman, and child on the face of this planet. And so that sense of eternal destiny, it gets easily clouded by today's reality. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying you don't deal with today's reality. What I am saying is that you got to lift your head above the reality and remind yourself, oh, yeah, it is about that. And okay, well, where did I miss it? And what is it? And what could I be doing better in leadership to not be overwhelmed by reality? How can we better organize the organic nature of the way God created the church in such a way that leadership is able to fulfill its future dynamic, mm-hmm. future thinking dynamic? There is no future if you don't think about it. Now, God has a future in spite of what we do or don't do. But a local church doesn't have a future, doesn't think about it. Mm-hmm. And so if it gets too overwhelmed with today, then all of a sudden the very nature of the gospel and the nature of the church gets lost in the demands of today. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden, okay, well, then it becomes a reality. It's like where we are in some countries that the church has absolutely no relationship to the lostness around it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, someone who has reflected on, implemented a lot of the biblical convictions that we're alluding to. I don't know how many times I've read some of these books, have walked other leaders through them, and each time it is just a very gracious reminder of what the task is, what our greatest assets are, mm-hmm. what the role of leadership is. And then for you personally, to me, as a mentor and friend, oftentimes our conversations, personal and public, have served as a bit of a windshield wiper for me, as things can get cloudy, blurry. And some people, certain personalities respond better to your dynamic, your personality, your presentation than others. For me, it's often like drinking a Red Bull. It gets me amped. Other personalities might feel inflicted when they talk with you. But my hope and prayer is that this medium may be used by the Lord with conversations with you, other leaders, mm-hmm. That are trying to implement some of these convictions and principles to help strengthen and encourage other church leaders and church members in this way. And so I'm grateful for the time that you're taking, not only with this episode, but other episodes of this podcast. And I look forward to more conversations with you. Thank you for listening to the Saturation Podcast, where we have discussions with church leaders about the life of faith and mission of the church. This podcast is produced by Saturation Church Planning. Saturation Church Planning exists to glorify God through partnering with church leaders in nations, regions, cities throughout the world towards the full evangelization of those places through the mobilization of the church. For more information, please visit scpglobal.org.